When you're experiencing significant looseness or tightness across this upper back area here, and maybe your sleeves are falling off your shoulders if it's too loose, or maybe you're feeling like they're digging into your arms if it's too tight, and we're still like the lower part, it's fitting really nicely. We like that area. It's just this area here, you can see it kind of slipping off right here. And if our arm was here, it wouldn't allow it to do that, right? We'd have a little bit of wrinkling going on here. Then we're just wanting to change this upper area. And this is also going to be like your across shoulder and affect your upper chest circumference. And you can see on this one here, it's just too tight across the back. This armhole seam doesn't even reach the armhole crease here of your arm, and you would find it just really pulling to the back. I've got it very exaggerated on this tiny little form here so you can see it, because 1/4 of an inch on this form would be like 1/2 an inch. So it'd be pretty significant if it was that much. But you're going to be feeling tightness here. You're going to have some horizontal wrinkles, and this is an adjustment. If it's more than a total of 1/2 an inch across, this is what we want to do. And I'm also going to show you how to do this on a cut-on sleeve and a princess line. And again, we're focusing on circumference issues right now, not length issues, just circumference. So across shoulder, upper chest area, across the back. This area we really want to get fit really well so that it's really comfortable across the shoulders and through the sleeves. It's kind of the foundation part of the fitting of the garment that is a top or a blouse or a shirt. Now we need to determine how much we need to add so we can measure, and try not to measure like parallel to the angles of items unless you plan on measuring that way when you add. Try and think of the body as like a grid. And so if you're measuring across the body in full circumference, you're going to keep your ruler parallel to the ground, right? So then that way you make sure that you're adding exactly what you need and taking away what you need. And so we need seam allowance here, and we need this so we can know that how much we're shy there, and then we'll add that to the pattern. And it's the same with if you need to remove some, you can put some pins and go, okay, this is my armhole crease. I know exactly where I want that to be and how much I need to trim off. And then, or you can pinch it out and pin it a little bit. It might be a little bit hard, especially if you're fitting yourself. You need to take it off, pin it, try it on, and then see, okay, that looks like about where I want. That feels really good. And then you can transfer that amount to your pattern. All right, so we determined how much we want to remove from this upper back here. On this one, we're going to add some. And we're going to take this section right here, and we're just going to move it in and out, just exactly and only what we need. So we're going to try and keep our line parallel to our center back. And the reason you do that is really so it's really easy to measure how much you're making it larger or making it smaller, because you don't really want to measure something if it's a diagonal line across the diagonal, because it won't give you an accurate amount. So we're going to try and keep our line parallel, and we know we want this on the left side of our dart here. So I'm going to go straight down just like this, and then I'm going to go straight over under my armhole. I don't have any seam allowance on my armhole edge, only on my side seam and my shoulder seam. So make sure that you respect your seam allowance on your armhole there. And now we're going to cut this just right here. And we know we want to bring it in about 1/2 inch. Well, on this one I do. So we can draw a 1/2 inch guideline here, just something to kind of keep it in check. And we're not going to move it up and down. We're just going to bring it in. So we're going to line it back up to that line there, and I'm going to keep this line in line with that. We're going to tape this down. And now we know that the main thing that we're changing here is going to be the shoulder length here and the circumference here at the bust or the chest. So we just need to true that up. This is quite a bit that I've changed on this little tiny pattern. This would equate to basically like 2 inches across the back, which would be kind of extreme. So bear that in mind. When you're trying to true up this seam, work seam line to seam line until you really get the hang of pattern drafting and you know you're not adding to your seam length or taking away from your circumference or doing anything like that. So, you know, you can draw all of your seam allowances in, and mine are drawn in on this pattern piece, but if yours aren't, you know, draw them in and go point to point. So if I had a seam allowance here, right, I'd have a little point right there. So I know that this right here is my seam because I don't have seam allowance up there. And then we would true that up just like that. And then you'd add back your seam allowance to that point just like that. And now we can just trim off that amount there. And that's all ready to go. And then up here at the shoulder, if you have a dart, I'm going to show you how to true that up, but if you don't have a dart, it's the same thing. You would go seam line to seam line, the juncture. So make sure you find your seam line on your neck and on your shoulder, and then you would just connect the dots straight down, and then make sure you add your seam allowance back. You get a nice parallel line. So if you have a dart though, what we're going to do is we're going to close the dart. And when I close the dart, I only fold it up to the end. Don't go past it. Don't be sloppy about that because it can kind of be hard to get it to tape shut. So now I'm going to try and tape this directly on itself, and this is so tiny. Looks like I'm going to need a little bit of paper, so let's put some paper behind there first before we do that. You never know. Sometimes you're trimming off, sometimes you're adding in. We may need it, we may not, so let's just be cautious and add it. So now we'll tape our shoulder. And we'll press that down really good. And now I can connect my shoulder at my neck and at my armhole there. And I'm going to add my seam allowance. That would equate to a 1/2 inch seam there. And now we can trim this edge. And we'll trim off this excess. We can even cut it off at the back because we don't really need it in these places. And now when we remove our removable tape here, we'll have the shape of our dart. You can see I filled in right there. And so now that's all trued up and ready to go. And we didn't touch this dart here. If we covered this up though, you know, this is extra paper. You can just cut it away so that your dart isn't covered up and you still have your markings there. All right, let me show you how to do this on a narrow one. So same thing. And it gets really close sometimes when they're really narrow to find that line so we don't have to bug our dart. And you can always, you know, transfer this dart onto another piece of paper, take a photocopy of it, trace it off or something like that, and then you can just transfer it directly just in case you have to go straight through it. All right, we'll come straight down. We'll go right next to that dart too. Draw a perpendicular line. If I could put it right here as well. You can see like this armhole comes in so far that if I draw a straight line, it just wouldn't work. And it's okay to do a curved line. The reason people show you to do this with a straight line is because when you measure, you want a perfectly horizontal measurement because this is affecting your circumference. And so if you were to cut it on a diagonal like this, and measure it across the diagonal going this way, you know, with your ruler lined up perpendicular to these lines, you're going to get a different measurement than what is actually happening. So if you wanted to spread this apart 1/2 inch and you measure this way, but then if you were to actually turn your ruler and measure across this distance, it would be less and you wouldn't get that full amount that you're wanting. So this is why people show you how to do this with a straight line. So if you are confident with this and you want to just kind of avoid all this, you know, hoo-ha here, you can kind of curve this and just make sure you measure perpendicular to your grain line and you'll be fine. Okay, so we're gonna cut this just like this. We'll get a piece of paper here and we're gonna need one. We're gonna need one here, and I'm gonna take some of this paper here, and we're gonna need some over here as well. Because when we slide this out, we're going to have to fill in below this. Let's just tape that there. All right, and we'll pretend like we're adding a 1/2 inch again. That would be a lot on this little tiny bodice, but we're going the full distance here. So we have our parallel line, line it up. You're not moving it on this edge here. And again, you just want to make sure that that circumference measurement is giving you what you wanted. So make sure you always respect what you're trying to add and what you're trying to subtract. And if you're wanting it to affect the circumference of it, make sure your change is actually affecting the circumference. If you only want to affect the length, then make sure that you're only affecting the length. All right, so now here we have our new circumference up here at the top, and we just need to true this up here. And again, you know, here is my line, my seam line there, and then I'll add back my seam allowance. So there's that. And we didn't change the armhole at all, so this isn't going to affect a sleeve if you're sewing a sleeve to it. This is also why we do it this way. All right, and then up here, if you don't have a dart, you can just connect your shoulder points there on the seam line and then add your seam allowance back. If you do have a dart, we're going to true it up really quick. All right, and we have our dart taped together. Connect our shoulder point, our neck and armhole for the shoulder. Add back the seam allowance so you get a nice smooth line, and trim it. Just like this, and trim off this excess here. Pick up your tape. And there we go. We maintained our dart here, and sometimes if I'm feeling like some of this is going to be confusing, I'll just take a little piece of paper and tape over it so that my eye doesn't go to that spot. My marking is still in the correct place, but sometimes your markings will also, you know, spill over somewhere. So just make sure you don't get confused right now while it's fresh in your mind. All right, now when you've added right here across, so you've affected the seam line of your shoulder. So it's not going to sew to the front unless you have a dart in there, or unless you make your dart larger, or you ease it into the shoulder. And so a lot of people will put an easing stitch across the shoulder, pull it gently. You don't need tucks or gathers or anything. It's not going to be this much that you have to ease in, and you can just ease it into that front shoulder, and then that way you won't have to worry about adding all this and it doesn't match your shoulder line anymore. So just ease it in there and it'll be fine. All right, I'm going to show you how to do this on a princess seam bodice that is a princess line to the armhole, not to the shoulder, and cut on sleeve, something like this. So if you have a cut on sleeve, you're probably rarely going to need to do this unless you there's just a unique situation with the garment that you're doing, and you just really need to decrease or increase this across back. And you don't want to affect the neckline. You don't want to affect maybe the waist seam or something like that. You're going to do the exact same thing. So we're going to get a parallel line to our center back here, and we'll just put it like way out here, closer to our side seam. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to cut this just along here. And if we wanted to add, we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to slide it over along there, just like that. You're going to be changing your shoulder line here. And so you're either going to need to ease to the front, or you're going to have to adjust the front to accommodate this, maybe by slashing and spreading up there, or overlapping if you're making it smaller. And then down here, you're going to blend it in. So if we wanted to add a little bit here, just like that, I'm going to show you this on the same way. Then we would blend this in, just like that, right? And we would be adding all this. Now, if we wanted to make this smaller across the back, and we're just talking about the upper back still, we'd have our line here cut, and we would still slide it along here on this bottom edge here and keep this parallel so that you can see exactly how much you want to decrease this up here. And then you're going to blend this in by going up here like this. And then same here, you're going to just go from shoulder point to hem point and true that up. So that's a cut on sleeve. Now for a princess seam that goes to the armhole here, same thing, we're going to do this because we're only focusing on the upper back here. probably could have moved this a little bit further over so I have something. Well, we'll just do it right here. We'll do it up a little higher, or a horizontal line like right here, just like that. And again, we're gonna cut it just like that, and we're gonna move it in and out, the exact same thing. We're gonna true up our shoulder seam, and then down here where our princess seam is, let's say, you know, we move this out that much. Here is the line, and here's the line. We can true this up just like this. You'd be adding this little tiny bit right here. I would measure your princess seam and then measure this princess seam and see if you need to adjust it at all. And I would adjust it right here. And you can line up your princess side front or side back there. Line it up on the seam as if it's sewn, and just make sure you have a nice smooth transition right there. And then again, you're gonna true up your shoulder seam. And we're gonna do the reverse if we're making it smaller. So if we wanted to make this a little smaller and we're truing up this upper back here, you know, this is going to be if your shoulders are falling off and you want to make it smaller up here, and you know, for the other one if it was too big. So here again, you're going to true this up to there. Looks like I already wrote on there. And same with your shoulder. You know, this one you'd probably have to fill in a little bit right here. And then you'd have your new princess seam there. And again, I would measure your princess seam and then measure this one and see how they're matching up and make sure that that length is working out. And I would line it up on here and fill it in or take away just until you get that exact measurement so they still sew together. And now that your shoulder seam is a little smaller, you might have to ease your front to it. And when we made it bigger, you'd probably have to ease your back to the front. And that's okay, because what you're trying to do, that actually helps that. Because if you needed more fullness and you had to ease this to the front, you're leaving all that fullness in there, and it's really not going to be perceptible on the garment when you're finished. And it's the same here. If you really needed to take this in, but you don't want to change the front so much, maybe you can trim the front armhole a little bit. All right, so that's how we're going to change across the back if you're doing the upper portion and it's affecting the shoulders, and maybe across the shoulder blades and the armhole. And we'll check out the whole back and some rounded back adjustments too. I hope you're enjoying my Fitopedia fitting series, and if you want to get more fitting tutorials, just check the description. There's going to be links to more. And if you would like a printed version of these mini tutorials, just check the description or look under the video, and eventually you'll be able to make your own little Fitopedia booklet. And it'll be a really great, quick, easy reference to how to diagnose and fit the issue that you're working on. So I hope you're getting a lot out of the series. Please let me know, like, comment, and subscribe, and follow along for more. Thanks for watching.